Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. If we haven't had a chance to meet in person yet, my name is Bridget Bray, and I'm the Nancy C. Allen Curator and Director of Exhibitions at Asia Society, Texas. Thanks so much for making time to join us tonight for what I know is going to be a great conversation with three really important artists. Tonight's program is Ocean is Boundary, Filipino-American Artists' Perspectives from Three Coasts. We'll be talking with Jeanne Jalandoni, Matt Manalo, and Charlene Tan, joining us respectively from New York, Houston, and from the Bay Area. So thank you again for being with us this evening. Before I briefly introduce the program, I'd like to say a very special thank you to two people who are responsible for bringing us all together, and that's Erica Wall and Patricia Carino Valdez. If you were lucky enough to see the Super Serap exhibition in person at Asia Society, Texas in 2019, you know their work. And during that exhibition, we also featured the work of Jeanne and Char, along with the artists Mick Gaspé and Om Franz Viana. And through that exhibition, I was able to meet Matt Manalo, and we'll talk a little bit about that also during tonight's program. So a special debt of gratitude and thanks to Erica and Patricia, who are responsible in some ways for bringing this all together. As I mentioned, checking in from the East Gulf and West Coast, the artists will discuss their current perspective on visual arts in their areas. And in tonight's conversation, each of us will discuss, and the artists will share their insights on how their practice and their approach to creating has been impacted in these recent months, and what they're focusing on through their current work and research. All three artists work across a broad spectrum of media and draw from their Filipino-American heritage in their respective practices. So I'm going to now turn to each of the three artists to offer a short introduction. And Jeanne, can we please start with you?
Hello, hi everyone. My name is Jeanne Jalandoni, and I'm calling in from Uptown Manhattan in New York. I received my BFA in studio art from New York University in 2015. I mostly work in a combination of painting and textile, reflecting on my Filipino ancestry and personal experiences as a second-generation Filipino American. And through this, I try to establish my own bicultural identity. In 2019, I was a Real Artways grant recipient and had a solo show entitled Sewing Mythology. And I was also a recipient of the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council Creative Engagement Grant, which I used towards my curatorial debut entitled Cultural Cousins, a show of Latinx and Filipinx artists. And then this fall, I will be an artist in residence at the Textile Art Center in Brooklyn, New York.
Thank you, Jeanne. Matt, would you introduce yourself also?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Matt Manalo. I was born and raised in Manila, Philippines. I moved here to the States in 2004, and I received my Bachelor of Fine Arts in Painting and a minor in Art History at the University of Houston. I'm heavily influenced by comic books and cartoons, and I usually work with different kind of materials, and which include, processes of collaging, painting, sculpture, and I'm constantly redefining the definition of home, finding new words and better expressing the idea and just the whole concept of it. I also, Bridget helped me found the Philippine X Artists of Houston in 2019, and I also run an alternative art space called the A-Leaf Art House.
Thanks, Matt. Char?
Hi, I'm Charlene Tan. I live and work in the San Francisco Bay Area. I was actually born in Houston. I am Filipino Chinese American, and I make work right now, kind of rediscovering and relearning Filipino textile weaving and using food products or other products that perform that identity for me. And I'm a resident artist at the Minnesota Street Art Studios in San Francisco, and I just was awarded a grant from the Southern Exposure Relief Grant. So that's me.
Thank you for the introductions and for people to have a chance to get to know you if they haven't already seen your work. Through the Asia Society website, after the program, you can do a deeper dive. All of the artists' websites and Instagram handles are listed there, so you'll be able to become more familiar with their work if you're not already. Matt, can we start with you? And in turn, we can all talk about this question, but are you making art right now? Have you been able to make studio time? What does that, and if you are doing it, what does that look like for you personally right now?
Yeah, I have been in the studio. I have been making work, but it's been very slow because my studio is also located in my house. I'm also being pulled away, like to doing, some chores and some when school was still in session, and I was doing a lot of homeschooling, which was very difficult. I never realized that. That's why we should pay the teachers more. Yeah, I've had moments where I've been really productive, and I've had moments where I'm just completely not in the right mindset to make work. But yeah, I mean, I still try to make work. It's just been really slow.
Charlene, what about you?
I've been working in my bedroom, as you can see. I'm actually sitting in front of the window on my desk, and I've been making work that's the size of my desk. And then I wish I have it on Instagram. I have paper and then the laptop on top of the artwork, so I feel like I have company. I do have an art studio, and then at Minnesota Street Projects, which was we were kind of recommended not to be around because of just they didn't know if it would be a safe environment. And I run one with 7 other artists, and we all had to navigate, stay in place, and then how are we going to be there with each other. So it's been a lot of adjustment because I like making objects in a very big way, and I have been kind of something that's the right size of a room, and now it's little desk. So that's been my adjustment. But I'm very lucky to make work still.
Charlene, maybe to sort of help for, Matt and I being in Houston, Texas is going through kind of a staged and partial reopening. But I wonder if you could maybe help the audience understand kind of where the Bay Area is in terms of its reopening. Or
I think
shelter in place status.
Yeah, shelter in place was you were highly recommended if you're not an essential worker to work from home, and avoid being in the public unless for exercising or groceries or essential things like you needed surgery. But some of that actually was delayed unless it was essential. Sorry, words. And so all the stores were closed, everything except for grocery stores and hardware stores and maybe the mechanic. So and everyone art studios decided to just don't go in unless you need to pick something up. And different things like that. And then I think we're in phase 1 too. I haven't been keeping that much track of it, but I think today was more things are open. You can go sit outside and outdoor seating in restaurants and bars. But still you have to still wear face masks as a mandatory thing everywhere.
And then Jeanne, can you talk a little bit about sort of what the studio practice looks like?
So my studio space closed as soon as stay-at-home orders happened in mid-March. Actually, someone in the building got COVID. So I was able to grab a few supplies. I left all my painting stuff in the studio because I was working on these paintings that were a really large scale, and I don't have that space at home. So, like Char, I'm also working in my bedroom. But before quarantine happened, I was able to make a pretty big loom because I wanted to teach myself how to hand weave. So that's what I've been working on and off throughout this quarantine. But additionally, in the beginning, I was also making a lot of face masks, and it turned into this giant production that I didn't expect at all. Like, originally, I was just like, oh, I'll just make some for my friends and family locally. But then when I posted about it, a lot of people were just like, oh, can you make me one? And I was just like, sure, like this will be a good practice for sewing. And I was using a lot of batik fabric that my mom had from the Philippines. And I started generating all these ideas around the significance of fabric and even like using batik. Like, what does that mean culturally? And then I had a friend whose mom donated me other batik fabric, but it was from Ghana. And that just kind of like went off in my head like, whoa, this is crazy. Like other cultures have batik. And like it sounds kind of naive, but I just started going down that rabbit hole of researching this significance. So there's that. And then I was also working on a few block prints of fish that I had carved out, and I'm trying to incorporate that in a larger textile painting. So we'll see how that goes. But right now my room is pretty much flooded in fabric. it's kind of embarrassing, but the reality.
Can you talk a little bit more, describe in more detail the fish and the block printing?
Yeah. So the fish, I had carved out this fish in college, but I wasn't really incorporating it into a lot of work. I think I just did it for fun. But I realized that the fish I carved out was milkfish. And in my work, I use a lot of Filipino national symbols. So the fish in the Philippines is the national fish, and Filipinos are known to first domesticate milkfish. And it's also like one of my favorite dishes. Um, so I'm trying to, I can't reveal too much because I'm still sort of sketching out ideas of how it will look like. But the last trail of thought I had in my other painting series in my studio was about Filipino cultivation and thinking about ethnobotany also, like how food is used in these civilizations and cultures and the significance of that. So I kind of want to dedicate this next artwork to milkfish and the history of cultivating this fish. But in doing so, I'm also projecting a lot of like my personal experiences around how I perceive milkfish as a US citizen, also as someone who's never been to the Philippines, like how rare this dish is. And in New York City, like whenever I go to Filipino restaurants, it's always like really expensive and the fish is really small. And the only place I usually go to get it is in Queens and Flushing. Or in Woodside, sorry. Sorry, Queens people. In Woodside. And it's always like, all right, we're gonna make this trip to this one Filipino store and get the milkfish. So it's a specialty item to me. But I'm not sure really like how Filipinos perceive it in the Philippines. Yeah.
Matt, one thing that Jeanne, is mentioning, this idea about how practices can morph and change, especially when new pressures come in, like the COVID closures and things like that. I've always been really interested in the aspect of community organizing, which I think of as part of your art practice. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about your work in founding Filipinx Artists of Houston, but also with A-Leaf Art House, which was, and correct me if this isn't right, but through the project Freeway Fellowships done by Diverse Works is, I think, how that got kicked off. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, your practice outside of the studio.
Yeah, both community work practices have actually started in that whole emptiness, feeling that emptiness, like, because um, I've been an artist for more than 10 years, and I've been navigating through these white spaces, not finding anyone who looked like me. So I felt like I needed a community to belong to. Not that I'm already part of other communities, but then something that was more particular, being Filipino. And then it was the same thing for the A-Leaf Art House. It was from a longing of seeing an art movement in a neighborhood that is known as the International District, except that we never had any kind of anything art that was going on in the community. So I just felt like these were the answers to those feelings of emptiness, and I'm very honored and grateful that Bridget, that you were able to that we were able to meet that day at Jeanne's and Char's show, and we were able to start that conversation, and finding out that there were actually more than just myself who are longing for that type of community. And I always tell them that they always say, like, oh, you founded us, but the reality is that they found me, that I kind of like gravitated towards them. That was the longing that I needed. So yeah, for the longest time also, I've just made work for myself, and I don't know, it felt kind of selfish just to make work for myself. I'm not trying to impose social practice to everyone, but it for myself, it's more fulfilling to be creating work with the community, and being able to hear their knowledge, their expertise, kind of like a mutual exchange of ideas, and being able to put things out together, yeah, I mean, it's a great feeling to be working with the community.
Char, can I ask you a little bit about if you've had time even yet to think about this, but I just wonder what your thoughts are about how these recent weeks and months, what kind of impact you think that might have on artists going forward in the future. Do you think it's going to change anything about the art world, or do you think it's something that we can't know yet?
I'm already seeing the effects of it. The conversations about having to give up art studios. Actually was having a solo and they closed down their gallery indefinitely. So from personal experience here, like just having to like apply to grants to float the studio I run. And then we were lucky enough at Minnesota Street Project that we had 2 months generously sponsored by the Rapping Boards, who founded the Minnesota Street Projects and like Adobe, which is like a resident in the studio building. So it's been like, I don't know who else is shutting down or like things are changing, because like a lot of people that I've been hearing through the grapevine are just, there are shows that they are in and they've been canceled. Luckily, a lot of them, few of them has got the honorarium, which is a really beautiful thing to just like hear that they got it instead of everything canceled, because a lot of work has already been put in. So there's a lot of reaction to loss and just processing loss here in the Bay Area. So, and just things, we see it like on social media, like everything's getting postponed or canceled, and yeah.
Jeanne, what about from New York? What's your perspective there in terms of the impacts on the art world and what you see as you kind of look into the future?
Well, like, similar to the situation going on with Char in LA, I think like a lot of things are like getting closed or postponed, or like for example, also like the residency at the Textile Art Center that I got accepted to. Um, you have to ask all these questions about like what's going to happen if there's a second wave, and what will my practice look like or my residency look like um, if they overlap. So there's just a lot of cautionary things for galleries and institutions to think about, even like the museum experience or gallery experience, like what social distancing will look like there. I guess, yeah, also in terms of just like the whole social situation with the protests going on, that's also having a heavy impact on how, like, what people want to see in museums and galleries now. I think a lot of people are finally waking up to challenging what art they're seeing and who exactly is making that work, which is, it's kind of like, well, this has been the argument for the past couple of decades, and finally, it's being talked about now. So I just hope that things actually do get acted upon and people do put the effort to make these changes possible.
Matt, would you share your perspective on that? This idea about, impacts in the art world kind of going forward from where we are?
Personally, I've already felt the impact, with solo shows getting canceled or postponed, and then some art gigs just kind of not happening at all. But I'm also hopeful, because with myself alone, I've started making digital work, which involves like video and all that. So in a way, it broadens more knowledge towards practice and just learning new techniques and softwares and all that. Also, I'm seeing a lot of like community work happening and community care involved with that. I know I say community word a lot, but I feel like it's more important than ever. But people are starting their own initiatives to show work. I think it's wonderful. And some museums are trying to change their practices and try to be more accessible to most people who hasn't even really had any type of access even before the whole pandemic started. So I think yeah, there's a lot of changes definitely going on, some bad, some good. I'm totally for telling the history as how it should be told, and in giving spaces and voices and amplifying voices of people who have been suffering the most within, you know, the U.S. history, particularly Black people and Black artists. You know, it's hard, but I feel like as humans, we've always kind of adapted, and I feel like we will be able to figure something out.
Kind of touching on that, and I'm going to pivot back and forth because we're getting great questions from the audience also. So I have a question from May, and it's sort of a follow-on from what we've just touched on. What is inspiring you right now? Are any of the current conversations on racial identity and experience manifesting in your work yet? So do you think, Shar, would you be willing to start on that? The idea of what's inspiring you right now, and are any of the current conversations starting to inspire new work maybe?
It's hard. You're definitely wanting to respond with my work, and like the narrative of whatever I want to make next, as kind of processing the pandemic, the loss, Black Lives Matter, and how it's affecting like my own. I guess the conversation I've been having a lot is like, how do you navigate your family and socially, where people can be, they're not, it's hard because there's like the whole anti-racist movement now, which I've always been of, and it's been hard to have conversations with things that are probably not very inclusive, just because it's just the nature of like non-intentionally or intentionally. And I've been seeing work that is like beautiful, that they're posting, repasting on like museums that are not inclusive, and on like the plywood walls, and just addressing the lack of in being inclusive, and like involving POCs and the Black community. And so it's definitely, I want to respond in kind, just don't know how just yet. Because I feel like I'm just emotionally exhausted from like just living with a mixed ideology of my family, and like POCs not supporting the movement, or protesters, or Black Lives Matter, and just like having that discussion every day, and just like with like friends, what do we do? Like obviously protesting, sign the petitions, be involved like in like current laws being pushed through. And so I feel like there's a lot of community like cohesion, just like how do we move forward? What do we need to do? Like who needs funding? Kind of like how do we support protesters if we can go protest? And because I'm like high risk, and I can't do high risk actions like protesting, so it breaks my heart. But like there's ways you can support outside of it, like supporting the bail fund. So I don't know if that answered the question.
Yeah, no, it's good to have the perspective. Jeanne, what about you? Are you drawing inspiration from what's happening right now? Or do you think, are you still in a processing phase in terms of your work?
Well, I mean, it's kind of complicated because I've always thought about like racial injustice in my work, especially through the lens of colonialism and US imperialism. So it's nothing new to me, but at the same time, the movement going on now, it's fueling that work even more. and making me think more about representation and what does that mean and when does it matter. Because I think it's easy to just paint like a Black or POC body, but if there's no real intention behind doing it or any message behind it, then you're just objectifying them in a way. So, I mean, it's a complicated thought process for me right now. It also makes me think a lot about like colorism within different cultures. Something that I've been very iffy about is seeing all these posts on Instagram that are like Asians for Black lives or Latinx for Black lives, because I feel like making those types of statements kind of erase the colorism within those groups. Like there are Black Asians, there are Black Latinos, Latinxes. So, I mean, there's a lot to discuss, and I'm kind of in like a similar phase as Char too, with thinking about family members or friends and kind of like checking in on how woke they are. And also, my siblings are also very good at, just like throwing a lot of resources our way. Like, I think it's more for like my parents and the older generation to consider, or like the other Filipinos in my family that live with a certain type of privilege. Not to say that like I'm not aware of my own privileges as well. Like there's just like a lot of nuance issues within this movement that it's, I don't know, it makes me like take more pauses when I work and thinking about every decision that I'm making, like how is it going to affect a larger community or an audience that might not have any access to Filipino culture,
And Matt, do you mind sharing on May's question about, what is inspiring you right now, and are the current conversations yet taking shape in your work, or are you still kind of thinking and processing?
I mean, I make work that's basically about identity and me being a brown body, but then also acknowledging that I also have a privilege. And that's probably one of the reasons why I'm also struggling to make work, like what Jeanne said, that, taking more pauses. And I think it's important. I think those pauses, and I'm using those pauses to do other work. Instead of like making my personal work, I'm like doing some translations in Tagalog for Black Lives Matter resources. I also joined into a zine called Victory Road, which is like a compilation of Pokemon drawings from artists, and all the proceeds will go to Black Lives Matter. So it's about, for me right now, it's also about using my energy and my privilege to speak up and to amplify other Black creatives. As for, running the A-Leaf Art House, I believe that I have a responsibility because I have a space. So giving that space, and I mean, when I started the art house, it's always been about inclusivity. So I really didn't have any kind of adjusting to do regarding programming. But, being able to use that space to show, the works of Black creatives, and how we can showcase their work and possibly help them be able to build a more sustainable practice through their art. So yeah, I mean, for my personal work, now that we're having this conversation, I just thought about that. Yeah, that's probably most likely the reason why I haven't really been making work as much as I usually do, is because I've also been busy, you know, putting my other like my knowledge into supporting the cause. Also, having that conversation with family, you know, it's not easy. I have family members who constantly send videos of, you know, Trump and why he's like a saint or something like that. I mean, you know, it's hard, but it's a conversation that we need to do, and is important, because like you know, we all think about our own liberations as Asians, as Pacific Islanders, but the only way to really achieve that is first by liberating Black lives first, and that's what I believe in, and that's what I'm planning to do, and to include that in my practice makes it a lot easier, because then I can be as creative as I want.
One thing that unites all of your work is the predominance of textile, and it just takes so many different forms. But I think also, you know, Jeanne, for instance, like the generations work that you have, that you've shared, in the combination of textile and painting. You mentioned before, right as I think the shutdown was happening, the creation of the loom. Matt was talking about the loom at Ailey Fart House. And I wonder if we could just take a turn, and everybody just talk a little bit about the presence of textile in your practice, and how in certain instances it's kind of continuing to morph and change. But maybe Jeanne, can we start with you?
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess like textiles for me originated with this idea of making the plushy rice cookers, which was exhibited at Asia Society, Texas. And I mean, like those sculptures were more kind of like, oh, this is comfort food. Like rice is something that I don't have with me all the time. But thinking about patterns, I think that was like my first encounter really experimenting with what kind of memories and associations I get from them. And then being able to use them in my paintings. I had like critiques where I used to make paintings where I would paint every detail of a fabric, and someone told me, why don't you just put the fabric in the painting instead of paint it? And I don't know, I think I was trying to make a point about how like the more time you spend with something, the more value it has. So that's, but then like using textile, I think it kind of created this more dimensional world for me where I had more flexibility in challenging the viewer for like what is real and not real. And I guess like that mimics this idea of being both Filipino and American, like what is considered Filipino, what is considered American, and are you enough of one thing or the other? So using textiles was a way to be like, this is something that you want to touch, that you can believe is real because it's present before you. Whereas painting is something you kind of have to like use your imagination to help you grasp. So I kind of just started like studying textiles more. So with the loom, I was really interested in how like piña or husi fabric is formed, which is like pineapple fibers and banana fibers. So I found like this YouTube video of this lady, and she's just like scraping the fibers from these banana leaves. And, it's kind of like a spider making its web where the fibers are just like super thin and fine. But when she weaves it, it creates this really like durable fabric. And that was just like really beautiful to me. And it made me think about how you can really control every content of your artwork from the most basic form. So like in painting, I was just asking myself, like, why am I painting on a canvas when I could paint on or incorporate other fabrics that have more value or more meaning towards the content that I'm already discussing? Like, this would only enforce it. So by me learning how to weave now, I feel like it might be a little obsessive. I'm kind of rethinking whether or not I can endure this process. But it's just making me think about creating work differently, and how every action I make is going to only inform the content of my work even more.
And Shar, for you, for people who saw Super Sarap, they understand how viscerally integrated textiles are in your work. But if they didn't see it, they'll probably wonder, why are these textile works in an exhibition with centering around a theme of food? But in this case, the ube is actually present, or the green tapioca is physically present. Can you talk a little bit about textiles and food for you?
Um, okay. It's I actually didn't want to do work with fabric because I wanted to study these patterns that I had a history with in my childhood, seeing it within the family, and living in the Philippines when I was younger. And I'm almost doing on assimilating myself through this visual language of these textiles of my ancestry. So I wanted to almost study it almost a weird anthropological study the patterns. And so I had them printed out, and then I wanted to learn the patterns by almost muscle memory. And I didn't want to do painting. I wanted to do something that was for me, something that I know how I identify as a Filipino Chinese American, the food, especially the products where you don't find it anywhere except for a thematically themed Filipino grocery store, Chinese grocery store. And that's how I feel like I connect to my identity. So I wanted to use these products that, in a weird way, when you clump them together, it looks like something else. So people think I'm using beads, or especially with the ube powder, which I put a little pigment in so it stays purple. It looks like powdered impasto, which was this really cool accidental, just these works were for me in a private, I wasn't making a lot of work. I had a huge break of making them work and then not. And I feel like I've spent all that time of the break to give myself permission to just make work that I needed to connect in huge level, which is textile. A kind of a gateway into being okay with being more Filipino, and almost doing my penance in a way, gluing those little tiny tapioca things with this little super tiny, and just being by myself and learning these patterns, and asking people, fellow artists that are I feel identify closer to being Filipino American and or were born in the Philippines. They're like Patricia shared books about her Filipino lineage, which was like crazy beautiful. I still need to mail them to her. I'm sorry, Patricia. I'm a little afraid to go to the post office. And like the community kind of like guided me through in a way that like I was making it for myself and then became like making it for fellow Filipino Americans, kind of highlighting like we do have something beautiful that is not Eurocentric. It does affect it later on, but two, it's like what I was finding was just like I didn't need to like feel bad that I wasn't French or British or like because we have beautiful like a beautiful visual culture that just needed to like be opened up. So
Matt, if people had an opportunity to see the exhibition you were featured in, There Is Enough for Everyone, they
Yeah.
saw textile as part of an installation for your work. If they've seen like the work Azul One, they see it in that more sculptural mode. Can you talk a little bit about how you're thinking about textiles recently?
I started using textiles as a form of like necessity because when I was still in art school, I couldn't afford art materials. Like I was a broke college student who was just writing articles for the school newspaper, and that's all of the income that I was getting at the moment. So I would go into like the grad students kind of garbage room. I'm kind of embarrassed, but that's the story. And I would like get some materials from there, and then I would make work from the materials that I received. So kind of like getting bounty from nature or from the world was kind of like my thing, and then I fell in love with the whole idea to a point where I started asking some friends like, hey, if you have any materials that you have in excess, you can just hand it over to me and I'll make them into something. And then so I started getting different types of materials from friends, even if they thought that I wouldn't be able to make anything about it, I still like started getting stuff. So you can tell that my art practice is kind of a little bit of hoarding. I have my like half of the garage in my house is filled with stuff, but it's organized. But so that's kind of like how it all started, my use of different materials. But it also kind of brings back to when I was still in middle school, where I was doing shop and I was working a lot with my hands, and I just wanted that kind of feeling of creating with my hands and not using a brush to make that mark or something like that. So the whole idea of building layers and all that. And then in terms of like conceptually thinking about the material, I've always been excited about rawness of materials. So that's the reason why you'd see a lot of my work has a lot of like raw cotton or raw canvas, or just straight up, it is what it is, no pretending of what it should be. Because I felt, these works are some sort of a self-portrait for myself. And there are moments in my work where you would see that some things are being painted over, and that would mean that I was dealing with something like censorship or whitewashing of something, and it was a direct, straightforward meaning of that. And also putting into context the whole idea of my ancestors using the tattoos as a form of clothing. It was like an extension of their clothing. So, you know, also being able to experience the whole traditional tattooing myself, it just spoke to me more that I should delve more into using materials or fabric that just spoke to me and straight up told me that, hey, you know, you're Filipino and you're making Filipino work. So that's what it is like for my personal work. And then since you mentioned the loom, we have an A-Leaf Art House loom, which is huge. And it was made by a good friend, Danny Wen, who's a fashion designer. I collaborated with him last year during my Project Freeway Fellowship. And the whole idea was basically bringing the community or weaving the community together symbolically, and because they get to put they get to weave into the material, the main piece itself. So everyone contributed into making one big blanket, and yeah, so like the whole idea of weaving it together and being able to share stories over the weaving and all that. I just felt like it was one of the important things that the A-Leaf Art House had to do first, you know, in bringing the community together.
Another question that's come in from the audience, Maureen is asking if each of you would answer, a year from now, where would you hope to be in your practice? I can see Jeanne. Jeanne, are you brave enough to answer first?
Well, it's funny because like when quarantine hit, I was just like, okay, I'm just gonna focus on the present moment. I'm not gonna think about a year from now or a few months from now. But I mean, the only thing I can think of right now is that I would like to do more textile installation work and work in an even larger scale than what I'm doing. I mean, that's all I can give right now. It's a very overwhelming question.
If I can tack on a component to it, Jeanne, do you think, as a call to action for those of us who are in the audience, listening to you and admiring what you're all doing so much, is there a concrete means of support that audience members can offer you as a community of artists? Is it, you know, making sure to buy work? Is it other means of support? Is there anything concrete you see that we as community members can do to support you as artists?
I mean, yeah, like, well, buying work, yes, is definitely like a huge support. But also going out to see these shows, even if they're not in well-established places, do make the effort to see them and show support for these artists. And yeah, I don't know if Matt and Char want to chime in on this.
Yeah.
But
Matt,
yeah.
Matt, what do you think about a year from now? And
a year from now, I mean, you know, it's a pretty huge, for me at least. In a way, I would still be continuing my work. I think, in terms of like scale and whatnot, I think I would also like to go into more larger installations and intricate installations, which involves a lot of sculptures. And then maybe being able to be better at doing the video work and possibly incorporate the video in the installations, I think would be really cool. But yeah, like also what Jeanne said, trying to support the shows that are not even in well-known institutions. I think that's a really good way to support the artist. You know, I mean, of course, also the sale of work. I mean, I'm a full-time artist, so it's my way of making income. But yeah, I mean, also if you're in Houston and you're an artist, there's a community for you, no matter what level of art you think you're in. Like if you're Filipino, then yeah, you're more than welcome to join us with the Philippine X Artists of Houston. Also, if you're interested with working with me through the Alif Art House, then I'm all ears all the time to support any artist. Even if you're a high school student, if you if you really believe in what you're doing, then let's have that conversation. Well, yeah, I think I would also love to give opportunities to other artists. If I had that platform to provide that, then I would love to do that for them.
Shar, what do you think? Can you even think for a year from now where you'd like to be, or are there concrete means of support you'd like to see people focus on?
I would love to be an artist who travels to do residencies and part of more than the communities that I'm in, because I feel like it's a big thing now, because I feel like everyone's connected more and kind of talking. So it's like a goal. And also just like, it would be great to have more financial support, because especially with emerging artists or people who aren't like in collections or in big museums, because like I know the small spaces I've been in, like conversation lectures, that like even a $200 purchase for like a small art gallery or an artist is huge. Like I support nonprofits, and I just sold a piece, and they are generous enough to like have us get a percentage, and like that's literally like supporting my studio to exist. So a little bit goes so far. So, but yeah, I feel like this experience has made me a little scrappier than I usually am, because it kind of put everything in perspective of like, what do we value? How important is it? Not a hobby. This is a life that we identify with in such a strong way. And like, I've I've been like taken back by how fiercely loyal and like supportive the community here is to survive. And like, what do we need to do? You're stuck in France in a residency that you've been there for 3 months. Like, how do we make this happen so you don't lose your studio? Who needs a studio? Who's stuck here? Kind of like, I need help moving. Kind of, there's a lot of hope for next year. So hopefully everyone like gets everything that they need, resources, emotional support, because I've thrived in the community that I'm in and communities. So just wanted to keep on going and helping and surviving also, and like keep making work.
Yeah, it's my fervent hope that all three of you have a year where you can keep making work and keep challenging us as viewers and keep bringing important questions to the forefront, because we benefit so much, each of us, from seeing the work that the three of you make. So I'm deeply grateful that you're willing to go through all the challenges and face the uncertainties, because it really benefits all of us that are part of your audience. So really a heartfelt thank you to each of the three of you for doing that, and for making time for this evening. I can't believe we're out of time already. I could talk to you guys for hours. So I'm so thankful that you had time to share your insights and your thoughts with the viewers and with me. I hope that we can do it again. And I just want to say a giant thank you to each of the three of you for being a part of tonight. It's been really great for me, and I think also for the viewers. They'll be able to revisit what you've said and the observations you've shared, because this will be available through our YouTube channel. So hopefully people will have a chance to come back and see it and learn more from what you've shared. So huge thank you to each of you, and a thank you to everyone in the audience and the questions that people sent in. I'm sorry we didn't get to more of the questions, but really appreciate everyone's participation.
Thank you, Bridget. Thank you for hosting us also.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
We'll talk more. Bye.
Bye.